It's beginning to look a lot like 1984. Endless, endless war. Bush has said it, Cheney said it, Rumsfeld has said it. We don't know how long the war on terrorism will last. It might last 5 years. It might last 10 years. It could last our entire lifetime. God, this is an even better scam than Vietnam. Well, that's going to explain all these so-called advisors, military advisors we have sent into Colombia, as well as making them the biggest recipient of foreign and military aid besides Israel and Egypt, we say to fight drugs. That's why we have to do this. Well, obviously it's to fight something else as well. Bush has now said he wants to have the Colombian military and therefore the death squad paramilitaries that they work hand in hand with to also be able to use the money we give them to kill guerrillas or indigenous people who attempt to interfere with oil pipelines they want to put through the rainforest. Then Bush, in his State of the Union address, comes out with
Iran, Iraq, and North Korea form an axis of evil.
He had not cleared that juvenile remark with anybody at the State Department at all. It just blew out of his mouth, kind of like Reagan's Star Wars fantasies. And all that's accomplished is it's totally undermined people who want a more moderate government in Iran that's not run by religious dictators, and we're making real progress there. Now people are going and running back to the mullahs and the ayatollahs because they're scared we're about to bomb them. South Korea, President Kim Dae-jung may have had his career shortened by Bush's little remark. He'd made more progress than anybody has in 50 years in breaking through to North Korea and trying to normalize relations. Now the North Koreans are slamming the doors in his face just like before because they're afraid that Bush and his barnyard friends are about to bomb them too. And sure enough, we then reveal people in the Pentagon with a little too much time on their hands have been drawing up plans to nuke not just the usual targets, but the seven dwarves are not just going to nuke Russia and China and North Korea. You never know when we might need to drop an atomic bomb on Syria or Libya or Iraq. Is Cuba in there too? I can't remember. No, that might blow and devalue real estate in Miami when it becomes radioactive. Can't do that. And as if we haven't learned already, here we are trying to stage coups in other countries. We tried to overthrow democratically elected President Hugo Chavez in Venezuela and replace him with a businessman we'd been meeting with steadily before it happened. It didn't work. So now we're trying to build up more and more people there to get rid of Chavez and put some other wannabe Pinochet in who will do Bush's bidding instead. And they were saying, well, now that we see how these people hide in these caves that we helped them build in Afghanistan, what we need are little trick-or-treat bag size backpack nukes. Little nuclear bombs that G.I. Joe could go up the mountain and roll into the cave and hopefully get all the way back down the mountain before the whole mountain blows up and it avalanches into the valley and maybe even triggers a quake on the other side of the valley. You know, after all, that last big one in Los Angeles was the same day as an underground nuclear test in Nevada. I always wondered about that. But anyway, how irresponsible is this? Little nuclear bombs, anything to save the nuclear bomb industry. How easy is one of those to steal? Even the Pentagon admits that if somebody did steal some of that or figure out how to make them, they'd have a 90% chance of bringing them back into the country and nuking us with them instead. Of course, one way to prevent that would be to not build them at all, but that doesn't seem to be the logic of Bush Incorporated. And if that isn't irresponsible enough, most irresponsible of all, they're saying to fight terrorists, we have to give Reagan his wet dream and Rumsfeld his windfall and put nuclear weapons in outer space. Star Wars, in other words. Even the spineless Democrats are saying, oh, well, maybe we better give it to them after all. Otherwise, we might look soft on terrorism. Space nukes wouldn't have prevented the bombings of the World Trade Center and the Pentagon. It wouldn't have worked. But maybe that's why Space nuke toys were never meant to be a defensive weapon. Those are an offensive weapon. The Pentagon says they need them for full spectrum dominance, to protect us from any rogue nation at a time when even when you cross the Canadian border, you'll meet an awful lot of people who think the number one rogue nation in the world today is the United States of America. Full spectrum dominance. It means anybody who does any rogue or potentially terrorist act, like asking Exxon to leave their indigenous lands or something, there's gonna be a laser beam from outer space that's gonna come down and fry your ass. But what happens if one of those toys malfunctions? Crashes back to Earth like the Russian space station Mir did not very long ago. Those things come back into the atmosphere and start burning up. They're going to blow, potentially scattering enough plutonium dust all over our atmosphere. After all, one tiny little speck is enough to give you radiation cancer and kill you. This could potentially kill every breathing creature on the planet. One of those Star Wars weapons malfunctioning scares the hell out of me, far more than Saddam Hussein and Osama bin Laden and big bad North Korea combined. And meanwhile, they're saying, oh yeah, we've also installed a shadow government of faceless bureaucrats in secret places who will be ready to run the country if anything should happen to our precious Bush administration. In a way, we might be better off with faceless bureaucrats than Cheney and Rumsfeld and the others who run Bush. But I think we've had a shadow government as long as I've been alive, and their names are Shell Oil, IBM, Microsoft, Sony, Disney, General Motors, General Dynamics. That is the shadow government. But not even that is enough for the Bush crowd. They're now saying that the International Criminal Court that Clinton signed off on, and that we've spent years all over the world trying to get this together to bring people like Milosevic and hopefully Pinochet and whoever was responsible for the slaughter in Rwanda and the others to trial, well, it doesn't apply to us. And we will invade any country that attempts to try an American in the International Criminal Court, which is going to be located in The Hague. So this means we're going to be invading Holland now, too. And we also said anybody who signs off on ratifying the treaty for the International Criminal Court, and 139 countries already have, they'll cut off their arms. And then Colin Powell, his congratulatory call to the first president of East Timor was, hey, if you sign on to the International Criminal Court, not one penny in foreign aid for you. And at the same time, with all these scares about terrorists, germ bombs lurking under every rock and bed, who torpedoed a worldwide treaty against manufacturing biological weapons? America pulled out, nuked the treaty, on the grounds that it, quote, did not protect U.S. interests. Specifically, it interfered with our desire to corner the market on bioterror weapons and the biotech industry in general, such as the Office of Naval Research in Arlington, Virginia, has been proposing creating genetically modified bugs they could make that would corrode roads, and they could eat up runways and eat up metal parts and lubricants and plastic and fuel. They call them anti-material biocatalysts. Trouble is, you let them out of the test tube or the bag and they eat up everything else in your enemy's country. Then what do you feed them? And if they're going to do this at Fort Detrick in Maryland, what happens if these bugs creep out like the monkey that was shot up with Ebola that got loose a few years ago? And again, this seems a little irresponsible to me to go into the Frankenbug business and all. And I fear for all the rising number of victims of racial repression against Arab Americans and immigrants of a certain skin color or religious faith. I go to Tallahassee, Florida, and just that week, some rootin' tootin' patriotic American drove his pickup truck through the front door of the local mosque. And last fall, right after 9/11, a guy in, I think it was Mesa, Arizona, outside of Phoenix, was opening his gas station for the first day of business, and somebody in the pickup truck did a drive-by and blew the guy's head off, killed him, because it had a turban on top. And he said as he was led away, I did this because I was standing up for America. And I also fear for what's going to happen to the veterans of this war on terrorism, too. I mean, a lot of people enlist in our armed forces thinking they're going to get job training or college money or an education, and instead they get sent into a war. And we have a great track record of waving our sword and pushing people around and killing thousands and thousands of people at the push of a button, but we have a piss-poor record of how we treat those veterans when they come home from wars, don't we? In San Francisco and so many other places, you see people holding up signs saying, homeless Vietnam vet will work for food. Regardless of whether you think as little of the Vietnam War as I do or not, that situation never should have happened. You won't even cop to all the people who got cancer and had kids with all kinds of wild birth defects because of exposure to Agent Orange in the Vietnam War, let alone how many more that happened to in Vietnam itself and still happens to in Vietnam because we never came back and cleaned up all the areas we poisoned with the Agent Orange. After all, it's not our fault. We had nothing to do with the problem. That's the way we treat people who came back with Gulf War syndrome, too. They come back and everybody's, oh, rah, rah, Gulf War, George Bush the First is great, support our troops. We didn't support the troops. Once they came down with Gulf War syndrome, we just said, fuck them, basically. Come down with blurred vision, spaz attacks, splitting headaches, mental illness, can't sleep sometimes, more cancer, more birth defects. Oh, it's just a coincidence. We had nothing to do with it, is the official policy. And what caused Gulf War syndrome? I mean, was it the experimental anthrax vaccine we made all the soldiers shoot up with and had never been tested on people before we sent them over there? Or was it that Saddam really did have germ bombs, or it was pollution from all the oil well fires? Or maybe did it have a little bit to do with us using shells coated with depleted uranium, which will go right through the armor of a tank and blow it up from the inside. But then what have you got? Radiation. We left a whole area of Kuwait and Iraq like that. We thought that was such a great idea, we used it in the attacks on Milosevic in Kosovo as well. Hey, we got rid of Slobo and his thugs, and now we've made your land radioactive, Kosovars. Come on back. Don't you want to thank us now?